A plane is on fire.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
The captain has just heard a deafening bang from the cargo hold. There is smoke seeping into the cockpit. Alarms are blaring. Instruments are failing. They are losing control of the plane. The ATC is on the line, helpless.
On the night of November 27th, 1987, South African Airways Flight 295, a Boeing 747-244 B Combi named Helderberg, took off from Taipei, Taiwan, bound for Johannesburg, South Africa, with a scheduled stopover in Mauritius. The flight carried 159 people, 140 passengers, and 19 crew. The aircraft was a combi version of the Boeing 747, designed to carry both passengers and cargo on the same deck. The rear section had the passenger seating, while the forward section carried cargo, separated by a reinforced bulkhead. This design was common at the time and allowed the airline to combine freight and commercial passenger service economically. Flight 295 was transporting 6 cargo pallets, along with standard passenger luggage. The flight was under the command of Captain Dawie Uys, a veteran pilot with over 20,000 flight hours, including significant experience on 747s. His co-pilot and flight engineer were also experienced and certified. The aircraft had flown without issue through its earlier legs and underwent routine checks in Taipei. The flight's route took it across Southeast Asia, over the Indian Ocean, and toward Mauritius for a refueling stop. This leg of the journey was routine until shortly after the aircraft began its descent toward Mauritius. At approximately 3:10 local time, the crew made their first unusual radio call to Mauritius Air Traffic Control. They reported smoke in the cockpit. The exact words were calm, but clearly indicated a problem. "We have smoke in the cockpit and we are starting to descend." A few minutes later, they transmitted another message: "We are diverting to Mauritius and descending." That was the last clear communication from Flight 295. There were no Mayday calls, no emergency codes were transmitted, just 2 calm messages reporting smoke. Radar contact was lost shortly after. Controllers tried repeatedly to raise the crew by radio, but there was no response. Shortly after the last transmission, Flight 295 vanished from radar. It had been descending at the time, but not at an alarming rate. There were no warning signs of catastrophic failure in the radio communication. The assumption at the time was that they were trying to manage the smoke issue and descend safely. But when the aircraft failed to land on schedule in Mauritius, emergency protocols were triggered. Search and rescue operations were launched over the Indian Ocean. By daylight on November 28th, wreckage was spotted floating on the ocean surface. It became clear that Flight 295 had crashed into the Indian Ocean, about 160 kilometers northeast of Mauritius. No survivors were found. Human remains, cabin materials, and burned sections of the aircraft were floating in a wide debris field. The aircraft had broken apart. Most of the wreckage had sunk to the ocean floor, which in this area is more than 15,000 feet deep. The debris on the surface was collected. Parts of the fuselage, cargo, and charred remains of materials were recovered. Among these were pieces of the cargo pallets, passenger luggage, and aircraft insulation. Autopsies on the remains revealed that most passengers had likely died from smoke inhalation before the crash. However, this only confirmed part of the story. The real mystery lay on the ocean floor. In early 1988, a deep-sea search was launched using remotely operated vehicles. The goal was to retrieve the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, the black boxes. The CVR was located months later. It had been damaged but partially recoverable. The FDR was never found. The recovered cockpit voice recorder included the last 31 minutes of audio. The recording revealed the sound of alarms and the crew discussing the presence of smoke. Initially, the smoke seemed to come from the main deck, not the cockpit. The flight engineer was heard going to investigate. The crew continued to manage systems and discuss procedures calmly, suggesting that although the situation was deteriorating, it was not yet seen as catastrophic. But at around the 7-minute mark, additional alarms sounded and the tone changed. Voices became more urgent. There were references to circuit breakers, loss of power, and equipment failures. The last few seconds of the recording were chaotic. Then, silence. Investigators found that the aircraft had broken apart in flight before hitting the ocean. Key parts of the fuselage, cargo hold, and tail were found scattered over a wide area. This meant that the aircraft snapped in half or exploded mid-air. The forward section, where the cargo was stored, showed signs of severe heat and fire damage. Some wreckage showed clear charring and melting, especially cargo netting, insulation, and metal supports. The fire had been intense. The rear fuselage section, which included the passenger seating and tail, showed signs of structural separation. Investigators determined that the breakup likely began from the bottom of the fuselage, possibly due to fire weakening critical floor beams and bulkheads. The investigation concluded that the most likely cause was a fire that started in or near cargo pallet number 5, which was positioned against the forward pressure bulkhead of the combi aircraft. The fire burned for an extended period and was likely not detected immediately. Because there was no automatic fire suppression system in that part of the aircraft, the fire spread unchecked. The smoke then reached the cockpit, triggering the crew's first report to ATC. Once the fire affected critical systems, wiring, hydraulics, and control linkages, the pilots lost their ability to maintain control. Eventually, the aircraft suffered a structural failure mid-air and broke apart. Questions quickly emerged about what was in the cargo. The manifest listed electronics, computer parts, and mail. But debris and insider reports hinted at something else. Some of the cargo showed unusual burn patterns, suggesting that highly flammable or chemical substances were present. Over the years, allegations emerged that the aircraft was carrying unauthorized or undeclared cargo, possibly chemicals or military materials intended for South Africa's weapons programs during apartheid. In 1998, during South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, multiple witnesses alleged that Flight 295 carried classified materials. Some even claimed the cargo may have included rocket fuel components or chemicals. There were also reports of tampered documents, a missing cockpit audio tape, and interference during the investigation. However, these claims have never been officially proven. South African Airways denied carrying anything illegal or hazardous, but the secrecy and missing evidence continue to fuel doubts. The Helderberg did not have an automatic fire suppression system in the cargo hold, something that was not mandatory at the time for combi aircraft. Instead, it relied on crew response, which meant manually inspecting and reacting to fire indications. The lack of adequate smoke detection, combined with the slow spread of visible smoke, delayed the crew's understanding of how serious the fire was. By the time the crew began to descend and attempt diversion, the fire had likely already compromised essential systems. Investigators believe the aircraft became uncontrollable in its final minutes. The floor may have collapsed, damaging hydraulic lines and control cables that ran through the belly of the plane. Eventually, the rear fuselage separated and the aircraft disintegrated in mid-air. All 159 people on board died instantly or from smoke inhalation prior to impact. There were no survivors.